How could this happen? I don't understand.
Just is he still good?
They did everything they could.
You think you know someone until the day they lose everything. The lawyer's voice had barely faded when the PHOS thought backed. Stepmother leaned forward with cold certainty and told the girl that her father had left nothing for her. The room fell silent. Everyone believed the young woman would break. What no one in that room knew was that the girl already knew the truth. Her father had left her $50 million, and she had decided not to say a single word. The lawyer finished reading the will, closed the folder, and looked around the room with careful eyes. The air felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Across the polished table sat Clara Whitmore, 26 years old, quiet, composed, her hands resting gently in her lap. Her stepmother, Margaret, leaned back in her chair with a slow smile that did not reach her eyes. Margaret's voice carried a calm cruelty. "Your father loved you, but he made his choices." The words hung in the air like smoke. Several distant relatives shifted in their seats. Some looked away. Others watched Clara with curiosity, waiting for her reaction. The lawyer cleared his throat. According to the document, the house, the company shares, and the estate management transferred to Margaret Whitmore. Silence spread through the room. Margaret folded her hands with the confidence of someone who believed the world had already chosen her side. Across the table, Clara said nothing. Her face revealed no anger, no shock, no protest, only stillness. But deep inside, Clara remembered the quiet conversation she had shared with her father just 3 weeks before he died. And that memory changed everything. Clara had never been the loud kind of person. Her father used to say that quiet people often carried the strongest storms inside them. Asterisk. Growing up in the Whitmore house had never been simple. Her mother passed away when Clara was 10, leaving behind a home that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. Her father, Daniel Whitmore, tried to fill the silence with warmth. He worked long hours building his logistics company from a small warehouse into a national network. Yet no matter how busy life became, he always made time for Clara. Saturday mornings were sacred. Pancakes, fresh coffee, and stories about how small decisions could shape entire lives. Daniel believed in patience, in dignity, in strength that did not need to shout. When Clara turned 14, Margaret entered their lives. At first, Margaret appeared kind, elegant, supportive, but time slowly revealed something colder beneath the surface. Margaret loved control. She controlled dinner conversations. She controlled family decisions. She controlled how money moved through the household. Daniel saw some of it, but love often softens the edges of truth. Clara learned early that arguing only fed Margaret's hunger for power. So she chose another path. She observed. She listened. She remembered. And in those quiet years, Clara built something powerful inside herself. Resilience. 3 weeks before his death, Daniel Whitmore called Clara into his study. The room smelled of old paper and cedar wood. Sunlight rested across the desk where he had signed thousands of contracts over the years. But that afternoon, his hands looked weaker. Life has a strange way of warning us when time is running short. Daniel looked at his daughter with a seriousness she had never seen before. He explained that he had quietly created a separate trust. $50 million placed in Clara's name. A safeguard. Not just money. Asterisk, a test of character. Daniel had built his entire life around one belief. True strength reveals itself through patience. The world does not need more loud people. It needs more steady ones. He told Clara something she would carry forever. Never rush to prove your worth to people who measure life only through power. Then he smiled, tired but proud. The strongest person in the room is usually the quietest one. 3 weeks later, Daniel Whitmore was gone, and the house that once felt warm grew colder overnight. Back in the lawyer's office, Margaret slowly stood from her chair. Her victory seemed effortless. "I suppose that settles things." The relatives began gathering their bags. A few whispered soft sympathy toward Clara, but none challenged Margaret's claim. Power has a strange effect on crowds. It makes silence feel safer than truth. Clara rose from her chair with calm grace. She nodded politely toward the lawyer and walked out of the office without argument. Margaret watched her leave with quiet satisfaction. In her mind, the story had already ended, but the real story had not even begun. The following weeks revealed Margaret's true intentions. She moved quickly. Daniel's office was redecorated. His trusted managers were replaced. Employees who had worked with him for decades suddenly found themselves pushed aside. Margaret treated the company like a prize she had finally won. Meetings became colder. Decisions became reckless. Profit mattered more than people. Inside the company halls, whispers spread. The old Daniel Whitmore spirit was disappearing. Yet Clara remained strangely absent. Margaret expected confrontation. She expected legal threats or public anger. Instead, she received silence, and silence made her confident. But silence also made others curious. Some employees began to notice something unusual. Several respected board members who had once worked closely with Daniel began meeting quietly with Clara. Nothing dramatic, just conversations, just patience, just careful planning, because Clara understood something Margaret did not. Power rushed often collapses. Power built slowly becomes unstoppable. Months passed. Margaret's leadership created cracks throughout the company. Contracts were lost. Loyal partners stepped away. Employees began leaving in waves. Stress turned Margaret sharper, louder, more defensive. And still Clara said nothing publicly. Then one morning, the company received an unexpected announcement. An emergency board meeting. Margaret arrived late, already irritated. Inside the conference room sat the remaining board members, several senior executives, and Clara Whitmore. For the first time since the will reading, Clara sat at the head of the table. Margaret frowned. This seat belongs to the majority shareholder. Clara's voice remained soft. That is correct. Margaret laughed lightly. Then she waited for someone to support her. No one did. The chief legal advisor slowly placed a document on the table. It confirmed something Margaret had never imagined. Clara Whitmore held controlling interest through the private trust established by Daniel Whitmore. $50 million strategically invested into company shares over the past months. Asterisk. Silent acquisition. Careful. Legal. Unstoppable. Margaret's confidence cracked for the first time. But Clara still showed no anger, only calm. She looked around the room and spoke words that would later echo across the company. Respect is not taken by force. It is earned through patience. And another sentence that employees would repeat for years: the quietest voice often carries the strongest truth. Margaret sat frozen, not defeated by shouting, not defeated by revenge, defeated by dignity. Over the next weeks, something remarkable happened. Clara restored the company culture her father had built. Employees returned. Partnerships were rebuilt. Decisions once driven by ego became guided by responsibility. Clara did not seek public praise. She simply worked, steady, focused, patient. Margaret eventually stepped away from the company with a settlement arranged quietly and respectfully. No public humiliation. No dramatic collapse. Just the natural consequence of choices made without integrity. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful message of all. 1 year later, the company held a memorial event honoring Daniel Whitmore's legacy. Hundreds of employees filled the main atrium. Old warehouse workers stood beside young executives. Delivery drivers stood beside senior managers. All of them connected by the culture Daniel had built. At the center of the stage stood Clara. She looked out at the crowd and saw the future her father had believed in. People did not stand because they were told to. They stood because respect had grown naturally. Clara shared one final reflection her father had once told her. Strength does not need noise to be seen. The entire room rose into silent applause. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. A moment of shared understanding. Because everyone in that room now knew something important. True leadership is quiet. True dignity is patient. And true justice often arrives without shouting. Sometimes the world mistakes silence for weakness. But stories like Clara's remind us that silence can also be strategy. Patience can be power. And dignity can change the direction of entire lives. The strongest victories are not the loudest ones. They are the ones built slowly, with integrity, until truth becomes impossible to ignore. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. And if you believe quiet strength still matters in today's world, subscribe for more stories that honor the silent heroes walking among us every day.